Okay, so have you ever heard the saying that watching TV or listening to music or just in general watching media rots your brain? I know I grew up with this idea of, oh, watching TV is bad, and all these other ideas of how it's a horrible thing and you shouldn't be doing it. And I've always wondered whether there's actual truth to these statements or not. And so in this presentation, we're going to be talking a little bit about what media really is, how it affects our brain scientifically, and if the Bible has anything to say about this. So it's going to be divided into kind of three parts, talk a little bit about the science. Then we're going to talk about Hollywood and the celebrities, and then talk about what the Bible has to say about that. So something I just want you guys to kind of keep in the back of your brains while you're listening is that we're in a battle for our mind and our attention. There's this cosmic warfare going on, and there is this struggle between Satan and God, and Satan is trying to distract us from God. And, you know, God is this still quiet voice, and Satan tries to be this loud, noisy, trying to make noise over God's still quiet voice. So just remember that a lot of the stuff we see in this world is just a distraction to keep us from being close to God. So I found out about this information about the dangers of media from this channel called Little Light Studios. And Little Light Studios, well, I'll actually let them introduce themselves here. They have a little video that I'll show you of them introducing themselves here.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mikey.
I'm Kendi.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Keith. I'm Scotty. And we are LED Live.
Light exposing darkness.
It's a show where we take a look at pop culture, movies, music, video games, you name it. We're going to discuss and look behind the scenes of what's really going on and filter it through the Bible.
Find us on our YouTube channel, Little Light Studios.
That was awesome.
So as you saw, Little Light Studios, they have this really cool name for their videos where they expose these kind of things in the media, and it's LED, which can also be the lights that you can put in your room, but it also stands for here, light exposing darkness, which refers to Ephesians 5:13, which reads, "But everything exposed by light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light." So their major goal is to shine light on the darkness that is in the media that a lot of times we just see on the surface and don't go deeper than that. They have quite a few interesting things that they do as well with their ministry. They have documentaries. I have a few here. These documentaries are, so one they have here is Battlefields Hollywood. This one talks about these things that that Hollywood does to cover up a little bit, well, cover up in the sense of putting it into these elaborate stories so you don't really realize what they're actually saying in more obvious sense. And they have a few others here on the scientific part of it, spurring it out a little bit, and the aspect through biblical. And they actually did one also on martial arts and the dangers of martial arts. And they also do shirts and things like that so you can wear your witness. And they do a lot of very interesting things. And it's a really involved community that really talks about going deeper into what the media really is. And so a little background on how Little Light Studios started. It started with Mr. Staub and Tom Meyer. They had a passion for filmmaking and Hollywood. However, a little later into their lives, they were raised by conservative parents, religiously conservative parents, but a little later into their life, they decided to attend film college and get into Hollywood. And they have a very long testimony talking about everything they saw, everything they did. So I'll just try to condense it a little bit shorter here. But essentially, they get into kind of a detrimental life story, and they ended up getting in contact with a childhood friends, and they went back to their home church, and they go back, they return to God, they return to the church, And as they're reflecting on their life, they realize some stuff they never noticed when they were actually in that lifestyle, key words in movies or certain actions that celebrities did. And they start to realize these things and they compile it into a one-time sermon, and they share it with their church. And people start asking them to talk about more things, like more different types of TV shows and things of that sort. And that one-time sermon turns into many other and seminars. And in the end, they started the ministry of Little Light Studios and the whole team that you saw in the video previously there. So, and they're really passionate about talking about the media and all these things because they themselves were, they went into the detrimental lifestyle that they did, and it was because of the media. You know, we have a lot of different lifestyles, different perspectives on how this affected. One of them went into the occult, the Wicca, so spells and magic, witches. Others went into Hollywood. Some went into more of those cultural, like witch doctors and things like that. So they all have something different to bring into the table. And so it's really interesting to see these perspectives coming out from those different areas, looking at media and saying like, hey, this stuff is very similar to what we used to do back then, and it's not good stuff. So it's really interesting to see what they have to bring to the table. And ever since then, I've been really interested and really passionate about talking about the dangers of media, and that's what we're going to get into today. So we're going to start a little bit with the science on how media affects the brain and how the things it can do to you. So going into the Strong's exhaustive concordance, you find this word called Pharmakeia. And you can see here on the picture, the screenshot here, a little bit of what it is. It's actually the word you use to the word we use where we get the word pharmacy from, because it has to do with, because the word itself means something that administers drugs, or that will cause you to fall into some sort of deception. So it has to do with like administering drugs. So in the pharmacy sense, it just has to do with administering drugs because you buy drugs at a pharmacy. But it has another definition where it has to do with sorcery or magical arts and falling under the deception or seductions of idolatry. And so essentially anything that medicates your mind into falling into the sorcery of media or of idolatry is what Pharmakeia kind of means. And it does occur, I believe it's a Greek word that occurs quite often in the Bible. I think they have a few verses here of in Exodus and Isaiah and Revelation. So it's very interesting that this word is there in the Bible. But so going into the kind of the science, our brain has quite a few lobes, and one of the biggest lobes in our brain is the frontal lobe, which is right here. And it's the command center of our brain. So it has to do with our personality, our reasoning, and causes, like if you damage this part of the brain, it can cause like ripple effects, or it can cause side effects to the rest of the parts of your brain. So other areas that control other things of your brain. It is the longest to develop and the last one to develop of the lobes of your brain, which is very interesting to note. And so it controls everything about our memory, about our discernment, about our choice making. And it's incredible that God gave us these minds and he gave us free will to be able to reason, and for us to make a choice between what we want to do, what we want to watch, and this kind of things. And you know, in Revelation it talks a lot about the mark of God and the mark of the beast. And what you might notice is both of them, of course the mark of the beast is also on the hand, but the mark of God and the mark of the devil are both right here where your frontal lobe is. And it symbolizes that decision you made to either be for God or against God. And so it's interesting, very interesting how science is catching up to the Bible in terms of being able to really know where to put that mark and be the part that actually symbolizes our decision making. So God gave us this free will to make choices, but there are things that can hinder us from making those choices. And there's one very interesting method that can hinder us from decision making. And it might sound outlandish, but hypnosis. If you grew up with the kind of idea of hypnosis that I did, it's always been portrayed as something, kind of weird, not really true or possible. It's always that kind of joke that people make of like, oh, I can hypnotize, and we used to pretend to hypnotize people. So it never really seemed real, but there actually is a scientific method of hypnosis. And there's this quote here from a university encyclopedia, and it reads, "Hypnosis is a mental state of heightened suggestibility, characterized by trance-like sleep. This is variously achieved by the repetition of instructions in a low-level voice or having the subject fix its gaze upon a light in an otherwise dark room." Interesting facts about hypnosis is people have actually undergone heart surgery, open heart surgery, without any medications for pain, just using hypnosis. And it's very interesting because we were just reading that Pharmakeia is something that drugs your mind, and the hypnosis seems like something very powerful. If you can go through open heart surgery, which I'm no doctor, but sounds kind of painful, without having any pain medication and just being hypnotized, now that's definitely something. And it's interesting where it says that that you can undergo hypnosis best if you're in an otherwise dark room with a blinking light somewhere, in front of the subjects, which sounds suspiciously a lot like a theater, which we'll get into that a little bit. But the Bible has some interesting things to say about our decision making. And 1 Corinthians 6:12 says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." So although all things, you can do anything because we do have free will, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is good for us. So we need to be able to make a discernment between what is good, what you can do and what is good for you in your spiritual life, and what you can do but won't necessarily bring you closer to God or affect you in a good way. And Deuteronomy 30:19 says, "This day I call the heavens and earth as witness against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Now choose life so that you and your children may live," which is Joshua telling the children of Israel to either be with God or be against God. And it's a decision, it's a decision that is left up to us. Even to this day, we are able to choose going against God or being with God. And God doesn't force his will upon us for us to follow him. So we need to be able to learn how to make these choices. So going back a little bit more into the science, there are 4 different brain patterns or brain waves that we can go into. The first one is delta, which is deep, deep sleep. It's one of those nights where you're super, super tired and you go to bed and it's like almost you blinked and it's already morning. So that's delta. Thea is a light sleep. It's the kind of sleep my mom goes to. Ever since she had me, she's always very, very careful to make sure that I'm okay. If I sneeze, she wakes up, "Are you okay?" So I'm pretty sure every mother goes through the light sleep brain pattern. The other one is alpha, which is, you're awake, you're conscious, but you're super relaxed. And this is actually a brain pattern that scientists have discovered that when we pray, we actually go into this, or when you meditate, you're actually in this alpha wave. And it's a completely normal brain pattern to be in. It's actually good. It's very relaxing. But when you're forced into it, it's not a very good thing. And this is the brain pattern that they use when you are hypnotized. And it kind of forces you into that zone, and it's not a very good thing when you're forced into it. Because normally we actually are pretty self-hypnotizers. Because if you've ever driven on a freeway and you've got all the lanes going by you really fast and it's dark, and you're just kind of staring at the road, and those 5-10 minutes go by really fast and you haven't even noticed because you're sort of you're going into this alpha state of mind. So it is normal, but it's not necessarily best to be forced into it. And beta is when you're awake and you're excited. So, you're talking to someone or you're just going about your normal day, and that's kind of what that brain pattern is. So let's talk about our left and right brain a little bit. So your left side of your brain is more analytical, critical, and logical, while your right side is more emotional and artistic and dreamy. And when you're watching TV, you go from all brain thinking to only right brain thinking. So it means you're filtering, you're not even filtering, you're just processing what you're seeing only through your emotional side. You're not logically thinking about what you're seeing. And actually 30 seconds after you see a scene, you're going to completely forget it. You will remember some more major parts, but for the most part, dialogue, little bits in the background, you're not going to really remember that very much. It might take you a few views for you to actually notice every little thing. And although you might forget it, you consciously forget it, it'll actually be engraved into your unconscious brain. So essentially, you're just in a trance-like state when you're watching TV where you accept just about everything. There will be a few major things you may not accept. For the most part, your logical side of your brain isn't really working, which is really dangerous. It's a very dangerous place to be. There's another thing that happens when we're watching TV, and it's the release of endorphins. And a scientist once described it as the body's natural opioid, and it kind of rewards yourself for doing something or for something happening. And this doctor was talking about how it's almost like you're getting an opioid fix when you're watching TV. And that's why so many people get addicted to watching horror movies, because you get this rush of adrenaline, of endorphins when you're watching it, and people get addicted to that. And it's interesting because some scientists have done some studies where people who are very heavy into watching movies, when they try to do a fast from that, they have the same symptoms as someone trying to break the addiction of heroin or opioid abuse. So they actually have some very similar side effects. And so it's very interesting that, science has been revealing this kind of stuff. And there's one more thing that happens as well in our brain, and this is going to be a video from PBS where they did a study on something called mirror neurons. So I'll have that video now.
This is brand new science. This is just out of the lab. We may have some special circuitry in our brains that helps us whenever we look at each other. Well, as it happens, scientists have an explanation for this strange ability to connect. It's new. And it began entirely by accident at a laboratory in the lovely old city of Parma, Italy, where a group of brain researchers was working with monkeys. And they were testing a neuron, that's a brain cell, that always made this sound whenever the monkey would grab for a peanut. So the lab had all these peanuts around, and whenever the monkey made its move, the neuron would fire. Scientists thought, now here's a neuron that is essential to motion. It's a motor neuron. Then one day the monkey was just sitting around, not moving at all, just sitting, when a human scientist came into the lab, and when that scientist grasped the peanut, the monkey's cell fired. Now, the monkey hadn't moved. It was the human that had moved, suggesting that this neuron up here couldn't tell the difference between seeing something and doing something. Seeing and doing were the same. Or more intriguingly, that for this neuron, watching somebody do something is just like doing it yourself. To demonstrate, he put me into this very powerful fMRI brain scanner that can peer into the brain while it's working. And he gave me some goggles so he could show me pictures when I was in there.
So you can see here the eyeball of Robert.
And once he had a good view into my brain...
Nice looking brain.
Thank you.
Robert, you're not supposed to talk when we scan you, all right?
Sorry. Then he said, okay, I'm going to show you a bunch of faces. And for each face, I want you to imitate it. So I did that. Then he recorded my brain while I moved my facial muscles.
We're going to do right away another one.
Okay. Then he said, okay, same faces, but this time, don't move a muscle. Just look. So I looked. When we checked the results... Oh, there's my brain. I've never seen my brain before.
This is your mirror area.
Jacoboni says that the part of my brain that's working when I make a face, the same part gets busy when I see the face.
Wow, so isn't that interesting? Our brain, with mirror neurons, it processes the things we see as if we were doing it ourselves. And that is something that should really be, at least for me, it was very shocking. Because when we're watching these scenes in movies, like if we want to be very, go down in the really deep end, when we're watching scenes with horror movies, it's processing as if we were there too, if we were doing murdering a character, if we were there going through the stress. And it's very interesting that we even have the ability to process things kind of the same. And I found these two verses that talk about following examples. Ephesians 5:1-2 says, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." 1 Corinthians 11:1 says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." And another version says, "Be imitators of Christ." And so it's interesting that we have this ability to imitate or to process things similarly to when we see someone else do that. So it's very interesting that this kind of stuff exists. Another interesting danger in media is being programmed into things as well. So for those of you who may watch the Super Bowl or may not, did you know that they spend over $5.5 million on commercials alone? And these commercials can be 5 to 30 seconds long, sometimes even longer, but usually it's a very, very short, even 3 seconds long advertising. And almost $5.5 million are spent on just those advertising. And believe me, advertisers would not spend money on something that does not work. In fact, they actually have psychologists to help them make these kind of advertisements, not just for the Super Bowl, but in general. And it's very interesting how they use subliminal advertising and how it codes our brain to react to things that we wouldn't have reacted before we saw that ad. But before we get into that exactly, I want to read a quote from a man named Neil Postman. He is the founder of the study of media ecology, of how media affects the brain. And he writes, "The horror of television is that the information goes right into our memory pool, but we do not react to it. Perhaps we react later, but we do not know why we are reacting to it. When you watch television, you are training yourself not to react, so later on, you're doing things without knowing why you're doing them or where they come from." And there's very interesting examples of subliminal advertising. There's one I found in a cooking show, a reality TV show where you wouldn't think there was an agenda being pushed. It's just people cooking and you're just, watching. But they have a very interesting thing. This man found it while he was watching Iron Chef. So here's that video.
Okay, so we're sitting here watching Iron Chef America, and I noticed the screen blink red. So because I'm recording this, I'm going through slow motion forward, frame by frame. This is at the end of Iron Chef America on the Food Network. And I have Dish Network if that makes any difference, but I doubt it. So here we go. We're getting closer. And look at this, a McDonald's ad right in the middle for just one frame. And we skip ahead. So here, let's watch this.
Although the Iron Chef's offerings are definitely dazzling, it seems that the judges preferred the beating they received at the hands of avant-garde gastronomer.
Coming up right now. I missed it. There you have it.
So isn't it interesting that sometimes this kind of stuff happens? And this one was a lot more obvious, but actually some scientists were making an estimate on how much this kind of stuff happens, which is a little better done than this one. And it's estimated that over the average person who watches TV is exposed to logos like this about 3,000 to 10,000 times. So you're seeing a lot of these subliminal advertising without you even knowing, in movies, in TV shows, in commercial breaks. And it's very interesting that even Duke University, they did a study on this to test if this actually works. So here's a video on the study they did about subliminal advertising.
This is Duke University.
The work we're doing is really studying what we call incidental brand exposure, and what that means is basically very short exposures to brand logos. And most of the time people think that these wouldn't have any impact on them at all. And in fact, they've happened to us so frequently. Recent estimates say somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 brand exposures a day is the typical number that the US consumer is exposed to. What we were interested in studying was to see if, in fact, those incidental brand exposures were having any impact on people at all.
So certain brands are associated with different personality traits. So for instance, the Apple brand has really cultivated an image of creativity and innovativeness. And so we thought that being exposed to the Apple brand might lead individuals to become more creative or to have a goal to be more creative.
Participants come into the lab and we tell them they're going to be participating in a visual acuity test. And the way this works is that a box will either pop up on the left or the right of the screen. And their task is to say left or right when the box pops up. In addition, to sort of further complicate the task and ensure that they don't catch any glimpse of a logo, for example, we have them keep a running tab of the sum of the numbers in the middle of the screen. They think all they're seeing is the box coming up on the left and the number appearing. What they're actually seeing is a box come up, the box disappears for a very, very short duration, like 30 milliseconds. A brand logo pops up, the logo goes away, and the box appears. What the person's conscious perception is that a box has popped up and gone away, and that's it. They don't realize that they've been exposed to the brand logo.
What we found is that people who were subliminally primed with the Apple logo actually had a goal to be creative, activated by this exposure, and they were more creative on a later task. So we asked them to come up with uses for a brick, come up with as many different unusual uses for a brick that they could think of. And what we found is that people who had been subliminally primed to the Apple logo were more creative than people who had been subliminally primed to the IBM logo.
Most television advertisements don't have much impact on people. And that's because as you're sitting watching the television ad, your defensive screens come up. We know they're trying to persuade us when they show us an ad. So our defensive screens come up and we filter that ad through these defensive mechanisms. These short brand exposures, though, people aren't even consciously aware they're occurring. So the defense mechanisms don't come up. And so if you're a brand manager, you might think about perhaps instead of spending so many resources on traditional television advertisement, maybe switch more of those resources over to encouraging very brief exposures, perhaps as product placements, not the cheesy product placement where you hold it up like this, but one where it's just seen in passing. Perhaps web placements or weaving brands into the natural lives of characters in video games or television shows might be a more effective and efficient way to allocate my marketing resources.
So it's interesting how science is catching up on this kind of stuff, where you can have people react. So like when you open a Pepsi or a Coke bottle, it makes that little sound. People kind of know, or they have this reaction. And you also have the endorphin release, how your brain kind of isn't logically thinking when they're watching TV, how this kind of subliminal advertising or subliminal messaging can happen, and you react to things not knowing why you're reacting to them. And so it's very interesting how all this science is coming up about media. And so then it kind of makes you question, well, what is in the media? If you can be so vulnerable to messaging, to reacting to things, not knowing why you're reacting, what's actually in the media we're watching? So that takes us to the second part of the presentation, which is talking about Hollywood and its celebrities. And so what's actually in that? So there are some interesting words here that I found their meanings too. So Hollywood, you may be familiar with. Hollywood is that big company of where most movies come from. And it's very interesting because in the Wicca, which is, if you're not familiar with the Wicca, it's just witches and spells and kind of like a cult. But Wicca uses the actual holly wood from the tree holly, or plant holly, sorry, to cast spells concerning sleep. So they use this wand made out of the holly wood to make people fall asleep under their spell. which is pretty coincidental, I'd say, that Hollywood has that, that they decided to name it Hollywood, just like this spell. Also, entertainment has some Latin root words in it, where enter means to go into, tain means to hold or keep possession of, and ment is the act of repeating or continuing this process. So entertainment is to go in, the hold and possess, and keep repeating. So it's supposed to grab your attention and keep your attention, essentially. And then media is interesting that it also coincidentally is a plural form of the word medium, which you may be familiar with, being what the Bible strongly tells the Israelites to be wary of, people who deal with familiar spirits. So it's rather coincidental that these words all have this sort of connected meaning. So let's look at Hollywood companies. So the first company that we can look at here is the Detective Comics, or the DC logo. DC is the Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman company where they do those kind of movies. And it's very similar to the crescent moon and star, which you can see there on the right. And it represents the moon goddess Diana from ancient mythology. And it's also the son of the morning, which sounds familiar to something we read in Isaiah, but we'll keep going. Witchcraft uses the symbol star turned to the left, and Satanism uses it turned to the right. Not saying it's the same thing, but it's kind of suspiciously similar. Just saying. If you look at the Phoenix Pictures logo, it's a picture of a phoenix rising, and in paganism, this is a sign of divinity. You look at another one, Legendary Pictures logo. That's of a Celtic knot, which is also seen in the occult and Wicca. It's a protective spell that invokes gods from the four corners of the earth to protect. And then last one we see here is a Jerry Bruckner Films logo, which I was able to find a little video of what appears when watching a video from this company. And it's actually taken directly from the Kabbalah, which is also some sort of paganism, is Jewish mysticism. And it also comes from a concept of where the tree symbolizes self and lightning, inspiration of enlightenment. So it's rather interesting that all these logos have pagan roots, are very similar to things that are pagan. And it's just very coincidental to say. I'm not going to say that it's exactly the same thing, but it's just very interesting that they have these same ideas. If you look at the Oscars, so the Oscars, where 30 to 40 million people watch this every year. The Oscars is a ceremony to honor actors' achievements in different categories of music, acting, the clothing, set design, all these kind of things. And when they win, they are given this little statue called an Oscar, the golden statue. And when you receive it, you become a star. Very interesting. So before we actually get into the history of Oscar, take a look at some of the videos of how the Oscars works and some interesting wording or dialogue that people do when they receive these awards.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next two presenters have done for fake news what the Fox News Channel has done for fake news. Please welcome Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Good evening, godless sodomites.
What are you doing?
I'm bringing the truth, John. We're in Hollywood, the belly of the beast.
You can't just read the prompter?
I'm reading the prompter in here. You can read that pablum.
Award show banter is not pablum. Reality television celebrates the human condition. By illuminating what's extraordinary in the ordinary person.
It warps the minds of our children and weakens the resolve of our allies.
The results are often dramatic and always unexpected. We're here to honor achievement in that category.
By giving you a golden idol to worship. Kneel before your God, Babylon!
So again, interesting choice of words you hear here. Godless sodomites, belly of the beast, worship the idol, Babylon. And one thing that I've always learned is that for a joke to be funny, there has to be some sort of truth to it. And I find it interesting because a lot of people say, oh, it's coincidental. They're just using that because it's funny. Well, interesting choice of words to make it seem, supposedly funny. And this isn't just these two comedians. You see it all over. This theme seems to reoccur when people receive these awards. You have another one here. This is Jim Carrey, and he also talks about this.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here tonight, as all of us are, to pay tribute to an American icon, an actor, a filmmaker, and truly one of my personal heroes, Mr. Clint Eastwood. I'm also here because the AFI is paying me $20,003, making me the highest paid megalomaniacal boy king in all of Babylon!
Once again, all of Babylon. Again, such an interesting choice of words. Megalomaniacal is a hard word to say. It's also someone who is psychologically ill with power. And it's very interesting what these wordings say, and there's still more.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus, this award is my God now!
Another interesting thing, what are these actors really saying? They're spitting in God's face. They're saying that they want nothing to do with God. And if the actors are doing this kind of stuff, now what would you think is the media being put out by these actors? And you still have one last one here that I found even more interesting if you wouldn't think those last 3 videos were enough to prove. Here's another one.
Thank you to Satan for giving me inspiration on how to play this role.
Once again, where are these actors coming from? What are they really doing with these messages that they put out there? And people just laugh and think it's funny and think it's a joke. But is it really a joke? It's kind of starting to seem too coincidental to be a joke. There seems to be this recurring theme of making God seem like the bad guy and, oh, Babylon, let's follow after Babylon. So it's very interesting that we have this recurring theme. And so if you continue a little more and we look into the origins of the Oscars, the Oscar has the statue that they give has a very, again, another coincidental appearance to the Egyptian god Ptah, which was a god second to Ra, very, very popular god, very important god in the Egypt system of beliefs. And the name Oscar comes from the Scandinavian Old English, and it means divine strength or divine spear, which divine, as you may be aware of, means from or like a god, and a spear being a weapon. And is it possible that Satan uses these Hollywood things and these people to create movies and shows of like a godlike weapon against us? Because when you think of these addictions that we were seeing when we were talking about the science, when you think of all this stuff that happens, you see that we can't fight this war alone. This cosmic warfare, if it were up to us, we'd be all lost. We need God's help and strength to fight, to protect us from this battle that Satan is trying to wage against God's people. And it's so interesting that, we still follow after these Egyptian gods. We're still been out of Egypt and spiritual Israel now, and we're still following after these Egyptian gods, these false gods that God has very well told us to stay far away from. It's interesting also if you look into where the Oscars used to be held, and before up until the 1999 Oscars, it was held in a building called the Shriners, which was founded by William Florence and Dr. Walter Fleming, which are both very high-ranking Freemasons. And if you look in their book, Morals and Dogma, Freemasons tell exactly where they stand. They say here in that book, Lucifer, the light bearer, strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning, it is he who bears the light, and with its splendorous, intolerable, blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls. Doubt it not. And they are very well aware of where they stand as well. So it's very interesting that we have Freemasonry incorporated in there as well. And in the 2000s, it did move to another place where it is now today, which is the Kodak Theater. And there's still lots of Masonic influences. I wasn't able to find an actual picture of the inside, but there is a painting there. And if you've seen one of their videos, which I wasn't able to link in here, you can see there's a sun motif, there's checkered flags, there's lots of archways. And if you see here in the picture of what they used to teach Freemasons, how to spot Freemasonry in a building or in a setting, it's very similar to what you might see inside that building. So there's still a lot of Freemason influences, and we can go down that rabbit hole and talk about how actors have come out as Freemasons as well. Lots of interesting things in there, but we'll leave that rabbit hole for another time. And the very home of the Oscars is called the Babylonian Court, which was inspired off of a 1916 movie called Intolerance. And they rebuilt the set for this theater, and the Oscars have used it ever since. And in the 2016 Best Cinematography Award, you see right there, I was able to get a picture of it. You can see an unmistakable Tower of Babel made of little Oscars, little idols in the back. It's very, very interesting that we have this kind of stuff coming out of Hollywood. And it's not just them. We were seeing those videos of people accepting those awards. Now let's actually look at the actors and where they're coming from. So let's talk about these celebrities. Before we get into that, I'd like to read a quote from Aleister Crowley on acting. If you don't know who this is, he's the most well-known occultist of all time. So anything that has to do with paganism, Satanism, he was that guy. He was definitely had a very sad ending to his life. It is very sad to see where people go when they completely ignore God, and he had a very sad ending. But this is what he has to say on acting. There are three main methods for invoking any deity. The third method is the dramatic, perhaps the most attractive of all. Certainly it is so to the artist temperament, for it appeals to his imagination through his aesthetic sense. So what he's essentially saying is that acting is the best way to invoke a spirit. And there are many methods to do it, but that is the best method to do it. That's kind of in the simple terms. It's the best way for you to get attention of a spirit. And actually Socrates also had something to say about this. And he says, in the like manner, the muse first of all inspires men herself, because they are inspired and possessed. They are simply inspired to utter that which the muse impels them to. For not by art or knowledge do you say what you say, but by possession. Again, very interesting, the words he uses. And the muse, if you are unfamiliar with, is one of the 9 goddesses of art in science. And she's all about inspiration and art. And it's interesting that Socrates is saying that it's not about actors don't just act because they feel like, oh, it's artistic, let me say this. They say because they're literally possessed by this goddess. In his time, that's what they believed. So it's very interesting to know these very interesting word choices they use in explaining this kind of stuff. And you have it from Socrates, and he lived, how many years before media and TV, and you have a man who actually works with the occult and Satanism and things like that saying these two things. So you would think that, there is something going on more than people realize. So let's take a look at the actual actors. So we're going to start way, way back, right at the beginning of the 1900s. You've got Rodolfo Valentino. And he was the very first kind of Hollywood celebrity, very, very well known. He was so famous, people would start fights and riots just to get near him. And it's very interesting because his scripts were actually directly from his wife, Natasha, who was a very well-known spiritualist and witch. And they have this quote here about Natasha, and it says, every night Natasha would hold a seance, calling forth help from the spirit world in her creative undertaking. Then, pencil and paper in hand, she would go into a trance and start writing. After her outpourings were typed up, they were brought to set the next day and given to the director. Very, very interesting. the scripts for at least for this man was literally handed from the spirit world to the director to be able to be made into a movie. Another interesting thing is you definitely can't write a script in one night right before the movie starts. I mean, I wouldn't think so. Maybe some, really fast writers out there can, but it's not very common you can do that. And it's very interesting because Little Lights Studios, when they were doing this presentation talking about this topic, they had a lady who had come out of the New Age movement, which is, the belief of meditation and a little bit of the occult, a little bit of Gnosticism all kind of put together. And she was talking about how this was possible through something called automatic writing, where it's essentially you invoke a spirit and that spirit will help you write really, really fast. And you're not really writing, you're just kind of watching yourself write because it's a spirit that's writing for you. So she was saying that it's quite likely that Natasha was doing that, channeling a spirit to help write these scripts. So it's very, very interesting. We have another actress from kind of this time period, and you may be more aware of her existence. She was very, very famous. Her name is Mae West, and there's an interesting video on her and her acting.
1930s, motion pictures were one of the mainstays of the Great Depression, and attendance to movie theaters skyrocketed.
Hello, folks. We are up here at Mr. Gorman's beautiful theater to see the grand opening, the premiere of my new picture, I'm No Angel. Of course, I didn't call it I'm No Angel for nothing. Don't forget, come up and see me sometime.
Movie star Mae West was also known as the Queen of Sex and the Statue of Libido. Her work helped to topple the biblical sexual boundaries that were deeply embedded in the people of the early 20th century.
She can have a romance with somebody outside of wedlock.
I've got another man in my life.
It was pretty raw.
I don't know how many that makes.
It was pretty raunchy for that era.
Well, when I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
No star had greater impact in the long run than Mae West. Mae West was a one-woman sexual revolution.
So I find it very interesting that, again, talking about the sexual revolution and talking about how America was very deeply founded in Christianity. Although it may not be exactly the same denominations and there's that whole deal, but it was embedded in these morals of Christianity, of intercourse before marriage, and other things of that nature. They're very, very deeply rooted in that. And the video was talking about, and you can see in history, Mae West really helped change that to make it more okay to have this whole wedlock thing. And it's very interesting that they were bringing it up. Like, why does it seem, especially in today's era where you have all these movements of what love really is, like, why does it seem that Satan's always attacking this concept of love, our sexuality, and our relationships with other people? Why does he seem to attack this so much? And what I think is the most important thing, and the reason why he attacks that so much, is because our best human example of God's love for us is our relationships with other people. There are better examples, but because we're only human, God gave us this love between a man and woman, and then when they have a child, sharing that love with a child as well. It's our best example of what God's love is for us. We're the bride of Christ. We're waiting for his second coming, for that symbolic wedding. And it's very interesting that if Satan can destroy this image of love, can make it, warp this idea of love, it's harder for us to understand how much God loves us, to understand how much of a loving God he is. So it's interesting that we see this attack on our love, attack on our sexuality coming out all the time in the media. And it started with Mae West, with other stuff that came out here. And not only that, we can see she too was very much into the occult. Kenny Kingston, he was her personal psychic, and also a personal psychic for the next actor we're going to be talking about. But he writes this about Mae West. When she was upset that no one had been able to come up with a script idea, she had walked about her room saying, "Forces, forces, come to me and help me write a script." She would begin to hear voices and images as plots were revealed to her. Mae would summon stenographers to work with her around the clock, as she would lie in bed in a trance-like state, dictating as the spirits entered. Very interesting. Again, we have this recurring theme of actors into this occult, into this idea of working with spirits. Again, her scripts were literally handed right from the spirit world to show up on the TV for millions of people to watch. Very interesting that this kind of stuff comes out again. Our next actress is one of the most popular, probably. I definitely haven't met one person who has never heard of her, and that would be Marilyn Monroe. So we have a video to show about her and also her practices.
Monroe attributed her ability to affect the public to other entities that would inhabit her and take her over. She was known for entering into deep trances before each scene. One of Monroe's close personal psychics recalled how she would draw attention from the spirit world, asking for their guidance.
When she saw a camera, any camera, she lit up and was totally different. The moment the shot was over, she fell back into her not very interesting position. And I don't know how to explain that.
Very, very interesting. He doesn't even know how to explain how she goes, you know, one minute she's all exciting and interesting, and another moment she isn't. Very interesting. And she has a quote where she reads, "Jekyll and Hyde, more than two. I'm so many people, it shocks me sometimes. I wish it was just me." And the lady I was talking about before, who came out of the New Age, also had this to mention where she said that it got to a point where she had so many spirits around her and in her that she didn't even know who she was. And it was tiring because, you know, especially at my age and a little younger, we're trying to still figure ourselves out. And, you know, when spirits come in, you're figuring out like 3 different people, you know, or how many people you might have inside of you. And so it's very, very interesting how she's coming out from this perspective of, you know, being completely inhabited by spirits. And it's interesting she mentions these 2 characters because they're actually from a book about a doctor who tries to find an evil version of himself, I believe is sort of the plot. And and it turns out in the end that he's actually only one person. So the first guy is really kind, sweet, very loving, and the second one is evil and just thinks about, you know, hurting people. And very interesting that he has this alter ego. And it's interesting that she mentions this because it is quite similar to how the New Age movement and other movements work. It's kind of all these spirits inside of you and you just don't know who you are. Very interesting that she is in this as well. We have another actress, another very famous one, Lucille Ball. You may recognize her from I Love Lucy, as Lucy. She, I think this show, I personally have never watched I Love Lucy, but from what they kind of talk about, it's just about a wife and a husband, and Lucy ends up getting into a lot of trouble all the time, and she always has this famous line of, "Don't tell my husband, don't you dare," and she's always lying to her husband, but it's always wrapped in laughter and, oh, it's okay because it's just for the fun. And again, going back to how America was very deeply rooted into Christian values, kind of made it seem like, oh, lying isn't that bad if it's for a comedic reason. So it's interesting how these like little laugh tracks seem to help push an idea that might be controversial into like, oh, it's okay because it's just for comedy. It's not like I'm going to go off and do it. So very interesting that this happens. And she was actually originally a film actress, and going from film to TV at that time was looked down upon because the era of TV was not as popular as it is today at that time period. And it's very interesting because of how she actually got into film acting, how she took that chance to completely ruin her career to go to TV. And it was because of this lady here, Carole Lombard. And they have a quote on how she made television history, and this is what it says. "It was the spirit of actress Carole Lombard who guided Lucille Ball to take a chance of television and accept the offer to star in I Love Lucy. The glamorous comedian, who had died in an airplane crash of 1942, appeared to Lucy in 1951. She was definitely not alive at that time. Because Lucille Ball accepted the spirit's urge to take a chance, honey, she made television history." Very, very interesting. This actress who passed away showed up to her and told her, oh, you should take this role. Now that begs the question, why would the spirit world care? why would they care about what we humans are doing? Well, God chooses his agents. He chooses people to share the truth of the gospel. And Satan, being the very copycat that he is and not being able to be very original, he is also choosing his agents to press his fake gospel. And so it's interesting because the spirit world is their handpicking, because they've seen humanity in its entirety. They know what makes us, want to do something, what makes us sin. And they're there, handpicking the ones they know, the agents they know that will help them in their undertaking of spreading their fake gospel. And so it is very interesting how they're breaking the moral code of people and being very involved in the creating of these actors and actresses. So it's not luck. There's a very intense on who these people, who rises, who falls, very, very interesting. And even in the creation of the TV, when the people who were making the TV were, first making, you can actually read that a lot of them held seances almost every night to help, so the spirits could help them build the TV. And they knew for sure that TV was going to be a great media for good and bad, because although the TV, yes, it has a lot of bad things, that doesn't necessarily mean all of it is bad. You have amazing facts. I mean, if it weren't for the TV and Wi-Fi as we have it now, I wouldn't be able to be here with you guys sharing that message. So it depends on how you use it, but most of it is usually not very good. So jumping a little bit more to the present, we have an actor named Hugh Jackman. You might be familiar with him if you've watched any of the Marvel movies, like Wolverine. He was the one who starred as Wolverine in that movie. So this is what he has to say about how he rose to becoming the very famous actor he is today.
Time classes and worked at a gym. And at the gym, I met this woman who, this isn't a lie, it sounds like a made-up story, but I was actually joining her up. And she was looking at me and she just went, oh, like that. I said, is everything all right? She said, you don't understand, I'm a white witch. You've got to get into acting immediately. I said, well, I'm doing a few part-time classes. Funny you should mention it. She said, no, you're going to be a big star and I want you to meet this woman, Penny Williams. I said, who's Penny Williams? She says, she's an agent. Well, I met her and she's still my agent. And the day after, I did an audition and landed a role on Neighbours. So all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, this is White Witch is true.
Very, very interesting. The next day, he got a role. Now, how could that just be luck? There's more into this than just coincidence or luck. The spirit world really is involved. If there's this cosmic warfare, of course they're going to use us as well, because we're fallen and we've allowed Satan to use us because of our sinful nature. So it's very interesting. These people are allowing themselves to be used by these spirits, empty vessels. And it's very, very interesting. My mom actually has something she'd always tell me, and she always says, an empty mind is the devil's office. You always need to fill your mind with good stuff and Bible verses so you don't end up doing something you're going to regret later. So it's very interesting how this stuff works. And we have another one. This is Denzel Washington. He's probably a little bit more well-known. He's done a lot of like Christian movies. And in this particular movie that him and the director Spike Lee are talking about is a movie called Malcolm X. And if you might recognize that name, Malcolm was a civil rights activist during the time of the Black empowerment movement, during the time where, equality wasn't very much of a thing. And so he played the role of Malcolm in this movie. And they're discussing when he was playing this role, exactly what he did.
What is the hardest role? Let's to maybe take Malcolm X out of the equation, but
because that wasn't the hardest one. The hardest ones are the ones that you don't want to be there. Malcolm X really wasn't hard because I had done the play.
Right. Chickens come home to roost. Right?
Yeah, so I felt comfortable that I could do it. And, I got the gift of gab anyway. Mm-hmm. So I was cutting and pasting his speeches. You remember we were shooting one day out there and you just kept loading the cameras up. I just kept going. I was making it up.
You were making it up, Denzel.
No, I wasn't making it up. I was using pieces.
I know, but even that, though, I was a witness to this. You channeled the spirit of Malcolm. Because I remember one specific time where, we went to Malcolm's speeches. And once you finished with the text, you kept on going.
Right.
And we I didn't say cut.
right.
We kept
loading the camera.
We kept loading the camera. And there were many times in that film where we all had to pinch ourselves because we thought we saw the reincarnation of Malcolm. It wasn't about impersonation, you know,
Trying to capture the spirit.
the spirit, and just trying to, you know, act as well. I'm gonna look like him and that, but that's just surface stuff.
Will Smith called me before he started Ali, and he was saying, "What should I do?" You know, and he did the voice for me, and he had it. I said, "I think you should go to Michigan and pray with Ali." When I did Malcolm X, I would just pray every morning, you know, before I came out of that trailer. I was like, "Malcolm, come on," you know, because it's not for me, right? You know, it's for him and for those, hopefully, that he affected.
Very interesting. Again, we see these key words: channeling, praying, asking for the spirit of Malcolm to help him do these parts. And actually, I wasn't able to put the full interview because it's a like an hour-long introduction or interview. But in one of the interviews he was talking about, Denzel Washington actually went 5 minutes over the script, and they were only doing like parts of Malcolm's speech and things like that. And when they looked, he was actually going on exactly what the speech was saying, going over, and they were saying he looked different. He was saying things that later in history, things they hadn't put in the script, later in history that they had pieced together that Malcolm X had talked about. And it's so interesting that, you know, he was able to do this kind of stuff, and it didn't seem like it was him. It was a reincarnation of Malcolm X. So what are these celebrities really pushing out there? And if that doesn't convince you enough, take a look at this other clip of Shirley MacLaine.
And we're rehearsing the astronaut Garrett Breedlove scene. He's explaining to Aurora what it was like to walk on the moon. She's loving it. And then we launched into the first take, and 2 voices came out of you. Do you remember this? 2 voices, and they were simultaneous words, but they were 2 levels of sound. And I looked over at you. You were amazed. I was amazed, and you said, "Well, sure, Cheryl, I'm many different people." I said, "No, Jack, you're channeling."
Again, for a joke to be funny, there's got to be some truth to it. And it's interesting how everybody's laughing here at this award meeting about the whole channeling thing. And Shirley MacLaine is actually a very well-known spiritualist. She is very into that. She knows exactly what she's talking about. And I think it's very interesting that, you know, everyone's just laughing it off, thinking it's funny, when really this is like textbook demonic possession, you know? You're tapping into a spirit and then like 2 voices come out of you. Like, now that's definitely not normal. And one of the last videos here I have to show you is another one from a movie called Ghost Rider. And the actor's talking about how he was able to get into that role of being Ghost Rider.
Were there any moments on Ghost Rider that were particularly hairy?
I mean, I didn't think so, but people told me that it was, you know, you were 150 feet in the air hanging from a wire. And but usually when I was Ghost Rider, I was in an altered state of mind, so I didn't have any thought about the danger.
Is it easy to slip into that state of mind?
No.
What would you have to do to get into that mindset?
I would paint my face in sort of like an Afro-Caribbean voodoo icon or a New Orleanian voodoo icon, Baron Samedi. I put black contacts in my eyes. I would put bits of rock that had a frequency to it, or allegedly had a frequency to it. I would sew Egyptian artifacts into my costume, and I wouldn't talk to anybody.
Sounds nice and intense.
Yeah.
So again, and it's funny because as a viewer, we wouldn't know that this kind of stuff is happening, you know, that people are putting stuff like sewing Egyptian artifacts into their costume. Very interesting this kind of stuff happens. And it's an interesting thing because Woodlight Studios often brings guests to their shows of people, again, who've come from all different walks of lives. And they talk about a little bit of demonic harassment and how that can sometimes happen. And one way they were talking about is things in your house. And they were talking about a band, or it's like a rock metal kind of group, talking about if you want to know how many spirits you have in your house, count your records. And it's interesting because with a lot of things, they in this particular instance, they prayed over their CDs so that a demon could attach themselves to those CDs and, and harass whoever, received that music. And it's interesting because they brought a few missionaries talking about, or that I was listening to some missionaries talk about how demonic harassment can happen when you bring like like one of those tourist attraction little bits of things that they sometimes sell in countries where the idea of mysticism and witch doctors are more prevalent. And they were talking about how there was these missionaries that brought back this painting, and it was a pastor and his wife, and they were getting harassed by spirits, and they couldn't figure out why. And so one of Little Light Studio's guests, who came out of the martial arts, he saw the painting and he was like, well, where did you get that painting from? And they said that they had gotten it from like a Middle Eastern place, and that they had been in, and it turns out that that painting was actually from a place of religious context to the Middle Eastern beliefs, and it had been blessed by their priests, and so it had spirits attached to it. And so I mean, they got rid of it, and it obviously went away. But it's interesting that even as a Christian, when you may believe in God, you may have things in your house that are kind of like, has like Satan putting like a foot in the door so he can still kind of slip in and harass you. And it's interesting with this whole artifact thing that even though, you don't see it, or you might have it in your house, that this kind of stuff is even in the movies. And so it's very interesting. And it's not just these actors. You have like Robin Williams. He's a very famous actor known for being able to do a lot of accents and a lot of voices. And he was telling Vanity Fair, a magazine, about acting. And he was saying, literally, it's like possession. All of a sudden, you're in. You just get this energy that just starts going. But there's also that thing. It is possession. In the old days, you'd be burned for it. But there is something empowering about it. I mean, it's a place where you are totally, it is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where you are really can become this other force. Interesting, he mentions that same character Marilyn Monroe mentioned. And it's an interesting thing that he mentions that people got burned for it back in the day. Why were people burned? Like, why did the whole Salem witch trial thing happen, where yes, innocent people died, but why did they even have this idea of wanting to burn any witches or heretics? What were they trying to protect society from? And why is it not as scary as it was back then? Today, someone tells you you're a witch, it's like not that big of a deal, but back then it was a really big deal. And so why has society changed, or why was it even that dangerous? What were they trying to protect society from? It's an interesting question to think about. You have other actors like Leonardo Dicaprio. These two different directors were talking about what it's like to work with him, and it was saying Leo's like a medium. He opens his body and his mind to receive messages coming from another person's life. Another director says, with Leo, you might see 30 people come out of him in a day. Very interesting again. And the Bible says that we're vessels, and it's an interesting way to put it, because we can be vessels for sharing God's gospel, but also if we're empty, Satan will come back, and he can, just like in the story that Jesus was talking about in the parables, he can bring back 7 more demons and inhabit that place too. So we can't be empty, like my mom was saying. You can't have an empty mind, because that's the devil's office. You have another actor, his name is Johnny Depp, another very famous actor. And he says, I know I have demons. I'm 30 different people sometimes. I know I have demons, but I don't know if I want to get rid of them altogether. But I'd like to experience them in different ways. And I've been told, oh, it's just a metaphorical way of saying, it's just something actors say. But again, is it really? There's a lot of coincidence. We're seeing this recurring theme between decades of, it's not just in today's society, it's back then too. So is it really as metaphorical as people are saying? We have another one here. Marlon Brando, he got in a lot of trouble for saying this. And he says, people lie constantly, every day, by saying something they don't think, or say something, I repeated that, sorry, or something that they don't feel, or trying to give the appearance of something that they don't feel. And that is acting. It is a strange profession for a grown man. So essentially he's saying that it's lying. When you act, you're just lying. And he was mentioning in the interview, I wasn't able to link that interview in, but in that interview he was talking about, well, no, it's not lying. You're just no, it is lying. He was insisting with the host that no, it is lying. You're not being truthful. You're being someone else, and you're trying to convince the audience of something you're not. So it is lying. And another actor named Shia LaBeouf, he actually goes off on that a little more and says, acting is a con. At the end of the day, you lie for a living. You're deceitful. That's my goal, to be the best possible liar. Very interesting. Why? These very interesting choice of words, and we're seeing it again and again. And once again, we go back to another very well-known occultist, Anthony LaVey. He's actually the founder of the Church of Satan, and he has these 3 very interesting quotes. I know they're pretty long, but they were so essential to what I was saying, so we're just going to kind of get over this paragraph. But he has these 3 things to say about television. There are television sets in every home, every restaurant, every hotel room, every shopping mall. Now they're even small enough to carry in your pocket, like electronic rosaries. It is an unquestionable part of everyday life. Kneeling before the ray of God, with our TV guide concordant in our hand, we maintain the illusion of choice by flipping channels, chapters, and verses. It doesn't matter what is flashing on the screen at all. It is important that the TV stays on. The second thing he says is television is a major mainstream infiltration for the new satanic religion. And the third one is the TV set, or satanic family altar, has grown more elaborate since the early 50s, from the tiny fuzzy screens to huge entertainment centers covering entire walls with several TV monitors. What started as an innocent respite from everyday life has become in itself a replacement for real life for millions, a major religion of the masses. Very interesting. Again, we were going back to what that scientist was saying, the opioid of the masses. Very interesting that he uses these words. And this is coming from someone who works directly with, saying with these spirits. So again, we find it very interesting this kind of stuff is even being said. And so there is a lot of darkness we've gone through and we've gone over. So there's got to be some sort of bright side to this. And thankfully, there is a bright side to it. And the Bible does have quite a bit to say about this. And it was hard to find everything, but I found these 2 major verses that I think kind of covers it all. In Deuteronomy 18:10-12, it's a bit of a long verse, but it kind of contradicts that big paragraph we just read. So now we're going to filter it and through the Bible. And it says here, let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or is a medium or spiritualist who consults with the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of the same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. Leviticus 20 verse 6 says, I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritualists, to prostitutes themselves by following them, and that will cut them off from their people. So it's very clear. The Bible says you're supposed to stay very far away from this kind of stuff. You're not even to be partakers or witnesses of it, because we just saw the mirror neuron things, and we can process it just about the same way. And so it's very, very dangerous that we're still entertaining this whole idea and just allowing ourselves to be entertained by devils. And it's dangerous going this far into the darkness because it sets yourself against God directly. And while he's still able to reach you, because there's no one too far gone for God to reach, it will be significantly harder for you to be able to leave those influences because it's a day-to-day struggle. You daily take up your cross and follow God. It's not something that you're just going to be able to get rid of one day and be done. And that's what Little Aleister talks a lot about. They say we're so passionate about this. You see this kind of stuff coming out of our media, out of our channel, because we really are passionate about about sharing our experiences with other people, because we've gone down these same paths. We've gone through the media. We've seen all this stuff firsthand, and we know how hard it is for us to be able to just get through day-to-day life of coming back to being with God, being where he's at and all. And so they're passionate about this because they know they've been in that place, and it's a very hard place to be at. And why this is so important is because one thing I believe very strongly is Satan is testing the waters for the whole second coming, Antichrist, of the fake second coming. Because if you really think about it, he's not going to come out of the blue and just all of a sudden show up, because, you know, that wouldn't make sense. People would probably be a little bit suspicious of that. But he's doing little by little. If you see in media how some movies are really pushing the line of controversial topics. There was actually a Netflix show that came out recently called Messiah, and it's actually a lot about that, where this man in today's time period comes and he's a lot like Jesus, but the show kind of gives you evidence that he may be God, but others say that maybe he isn't. So it doesn't push like it is or it isn't. It kind of lets the viewer decide. And it was very controversial. A lot of churches were really mad about it, and I don't really know what happened. I think I got canceled or something like that. But it definitely got a lot less attention than some, or it got a lot less attention than if it had been put back like 50 years ago, where people would have been outraged, they'd probably be canceled, lots of horrible things would probably have happened. So it's very interesting that Satan is using media to kind of push his ideas, push these kind of things to test to see if people are ready. And that's what, you know, the verse of 2 Thessalonians 2:9-10 says. And then Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good, acceptable, and perfect. So it's exactly what we're talking about here, being able to test it. And another verse talks about you're in this world, but you're not supposed to be of this world. As Christians, we should be different. You know, because what really is Christians, you know, back then in the time period, like for example, where you guys were showing the Gracelink video this morning about how they were able to spot that Peter was, you know, you look a little familiar, aren't you one that follows Jesus? Like how can we be like that in today's society, where people look at us and be like, hey, you're a Christian, right? No, we should be different. We should act different, look different, speak different. And it's interesting how, you know, a lot of us are watching these movies not even knowing what we're putting into our minds. So it tends to be a very controversial thing. I tend to get a little bit of hate for saying this kind of stuff, but in reality, that's what it is. You know, we have to be, we're different people. We're a chosen generation of royal priesthood, and, you know, we're God's children. And so we're children of the King. So it's important that we learn also to protect ourselves. And the things I've at least found that have helped me stay even farther away from media is constant prayer, being in constant communion with God. What I've learned is prayer isn't something you do in the morning and you say amen. It's something that you start in the morning and you only say amen when you go to bed. It's something that you're constantly praying, you're constantly in communion with God. You're like, you know, chatting with him and checking up, making sure that you're doing the right thing or you're going in the right direction. Reading and studying his word. That's where his words are. That's how he speaks to us. It's right there. If we have any questions or we're unsure of something, it's all there. It's all written in the word. And meditating, being in his presence, you know, just spending time with God, taking some time from being in the long and craziness of this world, just being in the silence with God is very important. And it's really renewing too. Or staying in fellowship with others, discussing topics and ideas that you might be unsure with. That's what keeps us from going crazy and, you know, trying to start a bunch of like conspiracy theories about stuff that we might have just, you know, become paranoid about. And it also renews our strength, you know, being able to be in communion with people who share the same beliefs and being able to chat and talk and discuss this kind of stuff. It's so good, and it's an amazing thing, and it definitely is something that really helps us in our spiritual walk. Being careful what you allow into the avenues of your soul. So be careful of the media you're intaking. Be careful of the books, what you're talking about, what you're listening to, what you're watching, because it all affects us in the long run. So we saw here in this presentation, it all affects us. And being careful, but being also aware of the danger, because we can't also seclude ourselves from the world. And that's what that verse, again, going back to that we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. Because Jesus, yes, he came to the earth and he shared he shared the message, but he also didn't like seclude himself on a mountain and just stay away from all people. He did share with people who were doing wrong, but he didn't partake in that. And so we should also be aware of those dangers. We should talk to people, but be also careful, because as 1 Peter 5:8 puts it, be sober-minded and be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And something that I was really listening to in Little Light Studios is saying that sometimes we don't talk about how powerful the devil is, but just how much more powerful our God is, because he knows how to trip us up. He's been studying humanity for its entirety. He knows what to do. He probably knows our family history and what the history of our family has caused us to trip up. But God is so much more powerful, and if we protect ourselves spiritually, if we hang tight and we hide under the shadow of His wings, we will be protected from that. And so another thing is, so what do we do if we fall prey to this kind of stuff? And you ask God for forgiveness, because something sometimes I struggle with as well is we think that we go to the church or come to God when we're all good, when we think we've got everything right. But that's not true. The church is a hospital. We're all sinners, and we're there to be able to be healed and renewed. And He's always waiting for us. In 1 Timothy 1:13 and 1 John 1:9, they both talk about how God won't take our ignorance into account because we didn't know what we were doing. And then when we do, if we confess wholeheartedly, He's there waiting to forgive us. He has that open arm. We're the ones who ran away. He never moved. He's always been there at the same place. We're the ones who decided to run off somewhere else. And then when we walk back, He's there waiting for us. And sometimes He doesn't even wait. He comes running to us. So just know that if you fall into this kind of stuff, it's okay. It's going to happen. But as long as you full-heartedly ask for forgiveness and come to God, He's willing to forgive you. And study His word, because again, that's what really keeps you. That's how you can really hear His voice. And James 4:7 and Jude 1:24 talk about that. And so call on Him when you feel like you're going to fall prey to that again, when you feel the temptations really overwhelming you. It's helped me a lot. Because sometimes, people ask me, oh, you want to watch a movie or you want to do this and that. And honestly, it takes a lot of will, but eventually I'm able to do it. And, praying to God, He's there. There's a lot of power there for us to use. And sometimes we just want to do it ourselves, and it ends up being not so great of an idea. So here are some promises you can trust. Let's end this on a good note. We've heard all about the dangers. We've heard all of this craziness, but there are promises we can trust. There is an unchanging God who loves us unconditionally, and He has stuff to tell us. Isaiah 54:17 says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is from me, says the Lord." So again, this doesn't essentially mean that you're going to be protected from everything, but it means that if you hide under the shadow of God's wings, you have this hope that although you're going to go through some really hard times in your life, you have this hope that in the end, in the long run, you're going to be able to spend all eternity with God and with your brothers and sisters in faith as well. Also, God tells you that you are never alone. He is always with you in Psalms 27:1. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" And another verse where I absolutely love this story, and it's the story of a prophet during the time of Ahab and Jezebel. You may be familiar with him. He was able to do this amazing miracle on Mount Carmel. And then Jezebel threatens him, and then he gets all scared and he runs away. And then he just tells God, you know what? I just want to die. Like, kill me now. I'm done. I do this, I do that. There's no one else that follows you. I'm the only one. I'm sick and tired of this. I just want to die. And God, after giving him some good food and water and a well-needed nap, which again, never underestimate the spiritual power of a good food, some good nap, water, some good rest. He tells him, you know what, I have some prophets that they're still existing. They're in hiding right now, but they're still here. And there are a bunch of people in Israel who have not followed Baal. You are not the only one. You're not alone. There are people going through the same thing as you. You may not see it, but they are there. So you're not alone in this. People in the past, people right now, and people in the future will go through the same struggles as you. So you're not alone in this. And the last one says that God won't allow temptations to overtake you that you cannot withstand. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So if there's a tough patch in your life, just know that he's not going to leave you alone. There are other people going through that same thing. Hide under the shadow of his wings, because it's going to be hard, but it's not going to be something that you're not going to be able to withstand. Because Matthew 17:13-14 says that the gate will be narrow, but and few people will go through it, but it's the way that goes to life. So it isn't easy, but it's going to be a path that in the end is what really, really matters. And I find it very interesting too, because definitely my life at least has been an interesting up and down on my spiritual journey too, and finding Little Light Studios has helped me a lot. So just pray about the information that we just went through, see what this means for your life, because although it's not relative truth, where truth might be right today and wrong tomorrow, you may be in a place in your spiritual walk which might be different to someone else's. Like in stories which you see of missionaries, where a chief told his people, once he was convinced that God was God, that if anyone didn't worship God or didn't believe in God, would be killed. And of course we know that, well, that's not how you're supposed to do it. But in his spiritual walk, a baby in the Christian walk, that God accepted that. And later on in his life, of course, he learned that, well, you don't threaten people with death if they don't believe the same way you do. But this information may not be the same, may not have the same effects on someone else's. It's a different thing. So it's between you and God. It's not something, you're pushing on for everyone has to follow. It's something that it's between you and God. So yes, that was really it. I just want to say a special thank you to Little Light Studios. First of all, they inspired me to do all this, and actually they were helping me write this presentation. They offered a lot of help, and they're praying, and it was really helpful. So and I was really excited to share this message, and I hope to be able to share it with more people, because truly there is a real danger in media, and we should really be able to share that with people. And let's definitely stay in contact. Make sure to check out Little Light Studios on YouTube or on their website. Just type in Little Light Studios on YouTube, it'll show up. They're on Instagram, they're on Twitter, they're on Facebook. For those of you who may speak another language or are more comfortable in another language, they have a Spanish channel. So you just put Little Light Studios Español, and they have that too. And they're working on an international channel where more languages they're translating the videos into more languages, so more people can be blessed by that. And if you have any questions, comments, or want information or disagree, I'm definitely excited if there are any people who disagree with this. You can email me there. It's ramilercd@gmail.com. And definitely stay in contact, because I definitely miss North Lake a lot. And I'm really excited. I wanted to share this message with you guys, because if it weren't for you guys, I don't think I would have accepted Little Light Studios' message as well. You guys really helped me on my spiritual journey, like a lot. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so thankful that I had this opportunity to share, and I hope you were blessed by it as well. So yeah, thank you so much.